Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Now this story was beautifully written and submitted to me by a fellow Hmong nurse who wanted to share her experience working at a hospital. It starts off with some pretty ordinary experiences, stuff that you could blame on being too tired or being overworked, but eventually she starts to experience some very strange supernatural happenings. Now, if you would like to share your stories, please send them to the email listed below. And before we get started, please remember to leave a like and subscribe and enjoy the show. My name is Mai, and for a few years I worked as a nurse on the night shift at a small hospital outside the city. I'm not going to say the exact name of the hospital because it is still open and I still know people who work there. It was not a huge place. It had an emergency department, a small maternity unit, a medical surgical floor, a few rooms for long-term patients, and one older wing that everyone complained about, but nobody wanted to talk about too much. When I first started there, I was still pretty new as a nurse. I had worked in clinicals before, but a hospital at night was different. During the day, the place felt busy and almost normal. There were families coming in and out, doctors rounding, phones ringing, and people asking for a lot of things. Everyone was moving around like the building was alive. At night, though, it all changed. The lights were dimmer, every machine seemed louder, and even the automatic doors seemed pretty loud. At first, I didn't think much about it. I was tired, nervous, and just trying to do my job. That was my main focus. I was learning where the supplies were kept, which doctor liked to be called right away, which patients needed extra checking, and all that stuff. To me, I really wasn't thinking much about ghosts. I thought that most of these stories, though, came from stress, lack of sleep, and people just seeing things in dark hallways. The first month was mostly normal. I had a routine. I would clock in at around 6:45 in the morning, get reports from the day shift, check my patients, pass medication, and do my normal day-to-day duties. At around midnight, everything would slow down. Around 3 in the morning, it got heavy. It was like the whole building settled onto itself. Every sound just seemed a little louder. The other nurses told me little things here and there, not in a dramatic way, but more like warnings. One older nurse, let's call her Carla, told me to not answer voices from empty rooms. Another nurse said that if I smelled cigarette smoke up near the old wing, I should just ignore it. Someone else told me that the elevator by the back entrance liked to open by itself after 2 in the morning. I laughed when they told me all these things, because that's just what you do when you're new and try not to seem scared. Carla's always told me, though, that one day I will understand. At first, I just thought that she was messing with me, but this is when I had my first strange encounter. The first strange thing that happened was small enough that I honestly almost forgot about it. I was working the west hallway. Most of our patients were older adults recovering from surgery or being monitored overnight. One of the rooms had been empty that night. It had been cleaned after a patient was discharged in the afternoon, and the bed was made with fresh sheets. I knew it was empty because I checked the assignment board, and because I had used that room earlier to grab an extra pillow. A little after 1 in the morning, the call light for that room went off. It was a little annoying, but not impossible. Sometimes the call lights just were old, and if they got pressed under the mattress or tangled against the rail, they could trigger by themselves. So I walked down the hallway, not scared, but just tired. I opened the door and said, "Can I help you?" out of habit, even though I knew nobody was in there. The room was empty. The bed was still made, and the curtain was pulled halfway. The bathroom door itself was open. I turned off the call light from the wall panel and checked the cord. It was hanging neatly from the side of the bed. Nothing was pressing on it. I told myself that it was just faulty wiring. That was the most reasonable answer. Hospitals are full of old equipment that should have been replaced years ago. I went back to the nurse's station and just ignored it. However, 10 minutes later, the same call light went off again. This time, Carla looked at me from across the station. She did not smile. She just told me that that room tends to do it. I asked how come nobody ever fixed it? And she shrugged her shoulders, telling me that they tried, but it never really changed anything. I went back, same thing. An empty room, a made bed, and everything looked normal, like I had just left it. I turned off the call light again, but before I left, I unplugged the call light cord from the wall, thinking that would stop it. Then, it went off a third time from the main board. That part bothered me, because it should have not been able to do that. Still, I did not jump to ghosts or the supernatural. I told myself that the wall unit was shorting, or maybe there just needed to be some new maintenance done on it. I reported the problem to maintenance, and I avoided the room for the rest of the shift unless I really had to pass by it. The next morning, maintenance came and checked it out. They tested the cord, the wall panel, the switch, and everything. The guy told us that he couldn't find anything wrong. He plugged it back in, pressed the button a few times, and said that it worked normally. Then he said something that made the other nurses go quiet. He said, "Was this the room with Mr. Lewis?" Carla looked up from her charting and told him not to start. I asked who Mr. Lewis was, but nobody answered me right away. Later, during our break, Carla told me that he had been an older man who stayed in that room for almost 2 months. He used to use his call light constantly, not because he was difficult, but because he was scared of being alone. He would call just to ask if someone could stand in a doorway for a minute. He passed away in that room before I started working there. I did not know what to say to that. It sounded more sad than scary. And honestly, I still thought that the people working there were just connecting two things that did not need to be connected. An old man that used his call light a lot, and later the call light malfunctions. It's just a little too convenient. But after that, I began to notice that room a lot more. Sometimes when I passed it, the air felt colder than the rest of the hall. Not freezing cold, but just a little cooler. Sometimes I would even see the TV on, but there'd be no patients inside the room. It would show a blue screen or a hospital information channel with the volume low. Once I found the bed raised all the way up, even though I remembered it being flat earlier. Again, there were probably explanations. Housekeeping could have gone in, maintenance could have tested something, and perhaps another nurse could have needed the room. That is how it went in the beginning. Everything had an explanation if you really wanted one badly enough. The second thing happened about 3 weeks later, and this time it didn't involve that room. Instead, it was in the supply room near the end of the west hallway. That supply room was small, with shelves on both sides and a light that flickered for a second before turning fully on. You had to badge in because there were certain items that we had to keep secured. I went in there at around 2:30 in the morning to get dressing supplies. I remember the time because I had just checked vitals and was trying to finish a wound care order before the next round of medications. I badged in, opened the door, and heard someone whisper, "Can you help me?" It came from inside the room. I froze with my hand on the door. The room was not big. You could see most of it from the doorway. There was no one standing there, and I thought that maybe someone was in the hallway behind me, so I turned around. the hall was empty. The nurse's station was far enough away that I could not hear normal talking from there. I stepped inside anyway because I needed the supplies and because a part of me was embarrassed for being startled by a whisper. The light flickered on and I checked behind the door, then between the shelves. Nobody was there. I grabbed what I needed and started to leave. Then, something fell from the top shelf behind me. It was a box of gauze pads. It landed flat on the floor. Not thrown, not dramatically, just dropped. I stared at it for a few seconds, then looked up at the shelf. The boxes were stacked pretty neatly. It could have slipped, and it could have been just sitting too close to the edge. That was what I told myself. But then the whisper came again. "Can you please help me?" It was close that time, right by my ear. I left the gauze box on the floor and walked out fast. I did not run, but I walked fast enough that one of the techs at the station asked if I was okay. I said that I thought that I heard someone in the supply room. She looked toward it, then looked back at me and said, "Did it sound like a woman?" I told her that I wasn't sure, and she told me to not answer it. That was the first time I genuinely felt uncomfortable working at the hospital. Not terrified, but uncomfortable in a way that it kind of stayed with me. I kept thinking how close the second whisper sounded. You can make excuses for a sound down the hall. You can blame the pipes, the radios, or just being tired, but when something sounds like it was next to your ear, it's a lot harder to ignore. I told myself that I was sleep deprived. I had been working 3 nights in a row. My brain was tired. Hospitals are full of noises, and maybe a patient called out from a room and the acoustics made it sound like it was close. That explanation helped enough for me to finish my shift. The next night, I avoided the supply room unless someone else went with me. A month after that, I had an experience with a patient that still makes me feel strange when I think about it. Let's call her Mrs. Alvarez. She was in her 80s, very polite and sharp enough that I could have a real conversation with her. She was admitted for breathing problems and needed oxygen, but she was stable. Her daughter stayed with her until visiting hours ended, and then left after making me promise to check on her mother often. At around midnight, I went to her room to hang a new bag of fluids. She was awake, sitting up slightly, looking toward the corner near the bathroom. I asked her if she was okay, and then she asked me, "Who is that boy?" I looked at the corner, and there was nobody there. I thought that maybe she was confused. Older patients can get hospital delirium, especially at night. It's common, a new environment, medications, and all these things that could make people see or hear things. I kept my voice calm and I asked her what boy was she talking about. She pointed toward the corner and said, "The one standing there. He keeps looking at my shoes." There were no shoes in the corner. Her slippers were under the chair near the bed. I checked her oxygen level. It was fine. I asked her about some basic orientation questions. She knew her name, the date, where she was, and why she was there. She was not acting confused at all. I told her that it might be a shadow from the bathroom light. I turned the bathroom light off and adjusted the curtain. She watched me politely, then looked back at the same corner and said, "No, he's still there." I did not know what to do with that. I did not want to scare her, and I didn't want to act like I believed her. So I said, "Well, I'm here now, and you'll be safe." She nodded, but she did not stop looking at the corner. About an hour later, her call light went off. When I came in, she asked if I could move her slippers onto the bed. I asked her why, and she told me that the boy keeps on trying to put them on. That bothered me, but again, I stayed professional. I moved her slippers onto the foot of the bed. She thanked me and seemed calmer after that. The next morning, when her daughter came back, Mrs. Alvarez told her about the boy. The daughter looked upset in a way that I did not expect. I thought she would be worried about confusion, but instead, she asked her mother, what did he look like? Mrs. Alvarez said that he was maybe 7 or 8 years old. He wore a striped shirt and he had wet hair stuck to his forehead. Her daughter covered her mouth. I was standing near the computer, trying not to listen, but it was hard not to. Later in the hallway, the daughter told me that Mrs. Alvarez had a younger brother who drowned when he was a child. She said that the family only had one photo of him, and in that photo, he was wearing a striped shirt. Mrs. Alvarez had not spoken about him in many years. I tried to stay calm. I said that patients sometimes remember things from their past when they are sick or stressed. The daughter nodded, but she did not look convinced. Mrs. Alvarez went home 2 days later, and nothing bad happened to her. That almost made the story easier to dismiss. Maybe she had a memory, perhaps she dreamt with her eyes open, or maybe her mind was pulling up an old image and placed it in the room. But the night after she left, I went in to clean up a few forgotten items before the room was used again. Her slippers were gone because her daughter had taken them. The room was empty. But there were some wet footprints on the floor near the bathroom. Small ones, like a child's. I called housekeeping because that was the logical thing to do. The housekeeper came in and they looked at the floor. She asked if someone had spilled water, and I said that I did not know. She wiped it up, and we checked under the sink and around the toilet. Nothing was leaking. The floor stayed dry after that. I didn't tell anyone about the footprints except for my coworker, Carla. She told me that sometimes the spirits of the relatives come to get the patients, or sometimes they just come to visit. I didn't really like that answer. It made me feel very uncomfortable. After a while, I started noticing that different parts of the hospital seemed to have their own story. That's when I started to really believe what my coworkers had told me. Another experience I had was with an elevator. It was an old elevator that staff used to move patients and supplies between the main floor and the basement level, where we had storage, laundry, and the morgue access hallway. I did not go down there often. Most nights I had no reason to, but sometimes we had to get extra linens or equipment from storage when the clean utility room upstairs ran low. One night, at around 3 o'clock, we needed more blankets. A patient's family had asked for some and the warmer was empty. I went with one of the techs, let's call him Daniel. The two of us decided to go together because we didn't want to go alone, and we didn't want to say that out loud. As we approached the elevator, the doors opened by itself. Daniel laughed a little bit and said, "See, it wants us." I told him not to say that. We stepped in, and the elevator smelled like metal and floor cleaner. Daniel pressed B for basement. The doors closed, and we started going down. Halfway there, the elevator stopped. Not hard, just a soft stop, like someone had pressed another floor, except there was no other floor between the main level and basement. The doors stayed closed. We waited, and Daniel pressed the open door button, but nothing happened. He pressed B again, and the button light flickered. I felt that heavy feeling I mentioned earlier, like the air had thickened. Then, the speaker in the elevator crackled. Not just an announcement, not music, but just static. Then we heard what sounded like a woman's voice speaking through the static. We couldn't really tell what she was saying. It sounded like she was speaking a different language. Daniel and I, we both looked at each other, but we didn't say anything. The elevator then started moving again. It went down to the basement and opened like nothing had happened. The hallway outside was empty, and the basement lights were on, but they were dimmer than upstairs. The floor had that really polished look that made it seem like it was wet even though it was dry. We grabbed the blankets as fast as we could and took the stairs back up. Later that shift, a patient on our floor began declining. He was not one of mine, but I helped him because nights are like that. Everyone helps when something happens. He was an older man with serious heart problems. The doctor was called, family was contacted, and we did what we were supposed to do. He passed away close to 6 in the morning. No one had taken him anywhere before then. No one had even said the word morgue around us at 3 o'clock. But when the funeral home came later and the body was ready to be moved, the same elevator opened by itself at the end of the hall. Nobody was standing there. Daniel saw it too. After that, he refused to use that elevator alone. I did not blame him. I did the same thing. If anyone asked, I said that I preferred the stairs for exercise. Then came the woman in the yellow sweater. This usually happened during the winter, when it got very dark early and the parking lot lights made everything look gray. I was assigned to the east hallway that night, which I did not usually work. The east side had a small waiting area near a set of locked double doors. Families sometimes sat there if they did not want to leave, even though visiting hours were technically over. Around 1 in the morning, I saw an older woman sitting in that waiting area. She had short hair, glasses, and a yellow sweater. She was holding a purse on her lap with both hands. I assumed she was family for one of the patients. That happened all the time. Sometimes families found ways to stay quiet in corners, and unless they were causing problems, we usually did not push too hard. I walked over and said, "Hi, are you waiting for someone?" She looked up at me and smiled, but she did not answer right away. Her face looked tired, not sick, just very worn out. I asked her if she needed help finding a room. She told me that she was waiting for her husband. I asked for his name and she gave me a first name, Harold. I did not recognize it from my patient list, but I was on the east side, so I checked the board at the desk. No Harold. I checked recent discharges too. Nothing. When I came back, she was still sitting there. I told her that I could not find anyone by that name on the floor and asked if maybe he was in the emergency department. She nodded slowly and said, "He always takes so long." I offered to call down to the emergency room. She thanked me and I went to the nurse's station and called. The emergency department had no Harold there either. When I went back to the waiting area, the chair was empty. I figured that she went downstairs. I even felt bad because maybe she was confused and I could have walked her to the right place. I checked the nearby bathrooms, the hallway, the vending area, and the lobby, but I didn't see her. At the end of my shift, I mentioned it to Carla because I felt guilty. She asked me what the woman looked like. I told her, and Carla went quiet. Then she asked if she was wearing a yellow sweater. I told her yes, that the lady was wearing a yellow sweater. Carla told me that there had been a woman who came in every day years ago when her husband was in the hospital. She always wore a yellow sweater because he had bought it for her. Her husband died there after a long illness. About a year later, the woman passed away too, not in the hospital, but at home. Staff started seeing her afterward, usually in the waiting area, usually asking for Harold. I did not like how ordinary that story was. It sounded like something that could happen. A woman waiting so long that maybe some part of her never stopped. I asked Carla if she was serious. She said, "You talked to her, didn't you?" That shut me up. The next week, I saw the yellow sweater again. This time, it was not on a person. It was folded neatly on one of the waiting room chairs at the end of the east hallway. I thought that someone had left a sweater behind. I picked it up and brought it to the nurse's station, planning to put it in the lost and found. It smelled faintly, kind of like soap. A few minutes later, the charge nurse asked why I was holding a towel. I looked down. It was a hospital towel. Plain white. Thin, the kind that we kept stacked in every clean utility room. I know what I saw when I picked it up. It was yellow. It was soft, it had sleeves, and I had my hand under the folded collar. But in my arms, it was a towel. I put it down and did not touch it again. The most personal experience I had happened near the end of my second year. By then, I was less nervous at work, and I knew the hospital a little better. I had my favorite patients, my favorite doctors, and the vending machine that usually gave 2 bags of chips if you hit the side after paying. I was comfortable there in a way, but not comfortable with the strange things, just comfortable with the job. My grandmother had passed away earlier that year. She was not in that hospital. She died at home, surrounded by family. I took a week off and then came to work because I needed routine. I did not talk about it much. I did not want people feeling sorry for me during a shift. One night, maybe 2 months after she passed, I was charting at the nurse's station around 4 in the morning. 4 is the quietest hour. It is too late to feel like night and too early to feel like morning. I was exhausted and trying to finish notes before the day shift came in. I smelled something familiar. It was not cigarette smoke. It wasn't disinfectant, but it was the smell of the herbal medicine my grandmother used to rub on her wrists. It came so suddenly that I looked up from the computer. Nobody was there, obviously. We were in a hospital hallway, but for some reason, the smell was right there, around me. I felt my throat tighten, and then the phone at the nurse's station rang. I answered it automatically. There was silence. Then I heard breathing. Not heavy, just soft, like someone holding the phone close. I said, "Hello?" And a woman's voice just said my name. I froze. It did not sound exactly like my grandmother, but it sounded close enough that my body reacted before my mind did. I got cold all over. I asked who was calling. The line clicked. I checked the caller ID. It said that the call came from the room with the call light that likes to turn on by itself. That room was empty again that night. I did not want to go alone, so I asked Carla to come with me. She did not ask why. That told me that my face must have looked really bad. We walked down the hallway together. The light above the room was not on, and the door was partly open. Carla pushed it the rest of the way. The room was empty. The bed was made, and the phone sat on the bedside table with the cord neatly wrapped, not even close to being off the hook. I checked the phone anyway. There was no dial tone issue, nothing unusual. Carla stood in the doorway, watching me carefully. I told her what I smelled. I told her about the voice. I expected her to say that it was grief because that was what I was telling myself. I wanted to hear her say that. I wanted someone to give me a normal answer. Instead, Carla said, "Sometimes this place uses what it knows to make you answer." I hated that sentence. For the rest of the shift, I felt watched. Not in a dramatic way, but more like when someone is standing quietly in the same room as you, and you can feel them even before you turn around. I did my work, I smiled at patients, I did everything that I usually did, but I did not sit with my back to the hallway again. When I got home that morning, I tried to sleep and had one of the worst dreams I have ever had. In the dream, I was walking through the hospital, but all the patients' rooms were set up like bedrooms from different houses. One room looked like my childhood bedroom, one looked like my grandmother's room, one looked like the waiting area. Every room had a call light hanging from the wall. Then, they all started ringing at once. I woke up sweating with my phone ringing on my nightstand. It was my mother. She asked if I had called her. I said no. She said that she had a missed call from me at 4:17 in the morning, but when she answered, all she heard was just hospital noise. I checked my phone. There was no outgoing call to her. My shift record showed that I had answered the nurse's station phone at 4:17. That was the first time I seriously considered quitting. But like a lot of people, I needed the job, and after a few days, fear turns into something else. I basically just gaslit myself into staying at this job. The final incident that I want to talk about happened during my last month there. I had already accepted another job at a larger clinic, mostly for better hours, but I would be lying if I said that the hospital had nothing to do with it. By that point, I was tired of feeling like every shift came with something extra hiding under the normal work. It was a rainy night, not storming badly, just steady rain tapping against the windows. The hospital felt quieter than usual because the emergency room was slow and we had several empty rooms. Empty rooms were always worse to me than full ones. A full room had a patient, a family member, a TV, or a reason for sounds. An empty room could make any sound it wanted, and you had to decide whether or not to ignore it. I was assigned to the west hallway again, and if you remember, that hallway has a haunted room that the call light goes off by itself. Of course, like usual, that room was empty. At around 2 in the morning, the call light went off. I stared at the board and felt angry more than scared. I remembered thinking, not tonight. I was so tired of it. I was leaving soon, and I just wanted a quiet shift. I walked down to the hall and turned it off without saying anything into the room. 5 minutes later, it went off again. This time, when I entered, the room felt different. The air was cold, but not like air conditioning. The bed was still made, but the blanket at the foot of the bed had been folded back like someone had been sitting there. The TV was off and the bathroom door was shut. I knew the bathroom door had been open earlier. I stood there for a second, trying to decide if I wanted to check it out. Nurses check bathrooms. That's part of the job. Patients fall, visitors get confused, people hide sometimes. There were a lot of normal reasons to open the door. So I opened it, but the bathroom was empty. However, the sink was running by itself, like someone had just turned it on. I decided to turn off the sink and then stepped back out into the hallway. I went straight to the nurse's station and got Carla to come back with me to check the room a lot more closely. By the time we got back, the room was clear. There was nobody in it. That experience really freaked me out. I think it was just the buildup and anticipation of opening the bathroom door and expecting there to be a ghost or monster behind it. Even then, it was still a little strange to see the water running by itself. For now, I currently work at a new clinic, and it's not as scary as my old workplace. The schedule's much better now that I work during the daytime, and it's not as scary as working the hospital at night. You know, guys, the more and more I hear stories about hospitals, the more and more I just want to stay away from them. Like, I'm just gonna go back to old school Hmong medicine or something. Just pick me a random plant from the backyard and start rubbing it on my wound, and I'd prefer that than having to go to the hospital, sleep there, stay there, especially at nighttime. I'd prefer if you just picked a random herb in the back and started grinding it in a mortar and pestle and then rubbing it through my wound, even if I'm heavily bleeding. Please, anything but the hospital. On top of that, they're gonna charge you an arm and a leg just to do a normal checkup. So let me know if you guys have any other similar experiences like this one. And remember to always leave a like and subscribe. I really need some subscribers so that way I can afford to buy alcoholic beverages. And YouTube's telling me that you also might like this video on screen. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you everyone for watching.